Three guys showed up in the middle of the night, pretending to be from the homeowners association. They had fake badges, fake authority, the whole act. Figured nobody would question them, that confusion and fear would keep everyone quiet. But what they didn't count on was my dad, Mark Walker. Retired Navy SEAL. A man who didn't back down when things got real. And let me tell you, once this thing kicked off, justice didn't just knock on our door. It blew right through it. It all started with a knock. Not loud, not soft. Just 3 steady thuds, like whoever was out there knew we were asleep and didn't care. I remember looking over at the clock. It glowed red, 3:12 a.m. One of those times that feels wrong before you even know why. I was lying there, half awake. I couldn't tell if I dreamed the sound or actually heard it. Took a second to register. Then, knock again. Louder this time. It didn't ask permission. It just went straight to your gut. I sat up, heart already skipping. The house was supposed to be quiet. We lived in a Florida suburb. This kind of thing didn't happen here. Not in our street. Not in our house. I held my breath, trying to listen. Nothing. Then out of nowhere, something downstairs hit the floor hard. Not dropped, knocked over. Then I heard it, the sharp crack of glass or ceramic breaking. Followed by a soft thump, like someone bumped into a wall. That was it. I was fully awake. I swung my legs out of bed. My heart and adrenaline finally caught up with each other. Then, fast and low, something moved at my door. It was my little sister. 10 years old. She slid into my room like a whisper, eyes wide and scared in a way I'd never seen before. Real fear. The kind that makes your stomach drop. She didn't say anything at first. Just crawled over, grabbed the doorframe like it was the only solid thing left. "They're at the back door," she whispered, barely making a sound. 3 men. I saw them from the upstairs window. They've got those HOA badges. Orange ones. Radios and clipboards. I stared at her, trying to make it fit. "Erupted people? At 3 a.m.? Emma shook her head, eyes locked on mine. One of them pulled out a crowbar. He tried to hide it, but I saw. And that's when the chill hit me, not from the cold, but that kind of dread that crawls down your spine and slows everything down. Look, the HOA could be annoying. Sure. Letters about the lawn. Complaints about where you parked. Stupid stuff. But they didn't do midnight rounds. They didn't carry crowbars. They didn't creep around back doors like they were trying to break in. Something was seriously off, and it was already inside our perimeter. Even so, I found myself standing, slowly, and stepping into the hallway. I could hear it now. Voices downstairs. Too calm. Not scared. Not confused. Like they belonged there. This wasn't a mistake. This was something planned. And someone was already inside. I didn't need to say anything. The second my dad stepped into the hallway and saw my face, alert, tense, not sure what to do, something clicked in him. Just this look, a flicker in his eyes. It wasn't the dad side of him I saw. It was something deeper, older. This wasn't curiosity. This was recognition. Dad glanced at the stairs, then toward the kitchen, where the voices were clearer now, still low, still weirdly calm. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't have to. He didn't need instructions. My dad, Mark, had spent over 20 years serving in places most folks only hear about on the news or read about in books. He could smell when something was off, and everything about this situation screamed wrong. The timing, the noise, the way those guys moved, none of it added up. Without saying a word, Dad turned and walked straight into the master bedroom. His steps were slow and steady, like he was already in the zone. I followed behind, a few feet back, careful not to make a sound, like even my breathing might break the quiet he'd just stepped into. It was like the whole air changed when he realized what was happening. In the closet, he went straight for the gun safe, one of those biometric ones. No panic, no hesitation. Just a smooth press of his thumb, a soft click, and it opened. Everything inside was laid out with the kind of order that only comes from years of habit, precision, and training. He reached for the AR-15. For some, that's just a weapon. For Dad, it was second nature. Like most people know their phones, he knew that rifle. He ran through the checks, loaded it, racked the bolt, all without saying a word. I stood there, completely still. I'd never seen him like this. Not mad. Not scared. Just locked in. Fully focused. Then he turned and looked straight at me. His voice was low and calm, steady. "Stay behind me," he said. "If they come through that door, we don't talk. We finish it." There was nothing dramatic in his voice. No tough guy act. Just a plain truth. The kind of thing a man says when he knows exactly how fast things can fall apart, and how one decision can be the line between survival and loss. I nodded. That was all he needed. He moved toward the hallway, every step quiet but firm. You could tell just by looking at him. His posture, his breathing, the way he held that rifle, he wasn't scared. He was ready. This house wasn't undefended. And whoever was testing that, they were about to find out. The house wasn't supposed to sound like this. Downstairs, just past the stairwell, I could hear the soft crunch of footsteps moving across the mulch outside, then over the tile. A deliberate scrape. A quiet shuffle. Then a voice. "We've had complaints about your landscaping. We need to inspect the side entrance." That voice made my stomach twist. It was too polished, too rehearsed, like he'd said that same line at a few other houses before ours. I moved toward the guest bedroom window, crouching low. Gently, I lifted one corner of the blind, just enough to peek out. 3 guys. Looked like they were in their late 20s, maybe early 30s. They were fit, definitely not out of shape HOA board members. And they weren't wearing anything official. No uniforms, no city badges. Just cargo pants, random vests, and bright orange tags clipped to their belts, like something off a rack at a hardware store called Badge Kit. One had a clipboard. Another one held a radio. The third, bigger than the others, had gloves on. And tucked under a folded pamphlet in his right hand was a crowbar. Right then I felt it in my gut. These guys weren't with the HOA. They weren't here to talk about hedges or overgrown grass. They were putting on a show, but it was sloppy. You could see the seams in the act. They weren't inspectors. And they weren't planning to leave. By the time I turned to look, Dad was already halfway down the stairs. His steps made no sound. It was like watching him go into full mission mode, clearing rooms, slipping through shadows like he'd done 100 times before. I stayed back, keeping just enough distance, trying to avoid every creaky spot on the floor. My heart was pounding like it was trying to warn me. From downstairs, there was more noise. One of the men tried the back door. The handle rattled, then came a slow, deliberate tap against the glass. They tapped on the glass again, softer this time. Like somehow, easing up now would make what came next less suspicious. But then the sound changed. A faint click of metal. And a second later, the frame groaned under pressure. They were trying to force the door open. I held my breath. Dad didn't say anything right away. He stood just outside the line of sight, tucked into the shadows of the hallway. Rifle low but ready. His whole posture said it. This was the line. Then, in a voice cold and steady, he spoke. "Last warning." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the space with this deep finality, the kind of voice that ends a conversation before it starts. Outside, one of the guys froze mid-step. He turned, looked straight at the house, toward where Dad's voice had come from, but he couldn't see him. He just stood there for a second. Everything went still. It felt like even time stopped breathing. Then, just like that, the guy lunged forward, quick, aggressive, and shoved the door open. He stepped right inside. That's when the whole thing stopped being a what if, and turned into this is happening. He came in fast, trying to look official. Still had the clipboard in his hand like it gave him some kind of cover. Like we'd mistake him for someone legit. But the second his boot hit the tile floor, everything changed. Dad was already waiting in the shadows. Locked in. In another life, this might have been a drill. But tonight was as real as it gets. Without even blinking, Dad raised the rifle and fired one shot. Not at the guy, but up. Straight into the ceiling. The flash lit up the hallway like lightning. The shot cracked through the house. Plaster rained down like a dry, snowy mist. For a second, everything was just sound. Loud rock. That one round felt like a bomb in the quiet of our suburban kitchen. Then silence. Thick, heavy. And then came Dad's voice, cutting through it clean. Down. Face on the floor. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His voice was sharp, precise, like someone who's had to give that order before and knew exactly when it needed to be obeyed. The guy in the doorway flinched hard, dust still falling around him. The clipboard slipped from his hand and clacked on the tile. Then he bolted. Didn't say a word. Just turned and sprinted back into the dark, shoes skidding across the wet porch. But Dad didn't lower the rifle, because the second one was already moving. The next guy came in fast, low, focused, and this time, armed. No room for talking. No second warning. From halfway up the stairs, I could see it, the flash of metal in his hand. A handgun. He wasn't clumsy with it either. He raised it like he meant business. But Dad didn't hesitate. Didn't flinch. Didn't even speak. He just acted. 2 clean shots. Quick. Controlled. The first one hit the guy in the shoulder, spun him halfway around with a grunt. The second hit lower, hard, and dropped him where he stood. He collapsed onto the tile, his gun sliding across the floor, spinning under one of the kitchen chairs. The sound that came out of him, it wasn't a scream. Not exactly rage either. More like a mess of shock and pain. That moment when someone realizes they picked the wrong house. I didn't move. Couldn't. From the stairs, I could only see pieces of it all. The open door. The guy laid out on the floor. Light bouncing off the tile. The haze of dust still floating down from the ceiling. But what I saw the clearest was my dad. My dad didn't look proud. He didn't look rattled either. He just looked steady, like this was exactly the moment he'd been trained for. Not the shooting, not the chaos, but this. The point where the world crossed a line, and it became his job to push back. Mark moved forward slowly, checking the frame of the door, then the windows, then those deeper shadows just past the porch. His voice, quiet and calm, drifted back toward me, like an anchor dropping in the storm. Still 2 out there. Don't move. I gave a small nod, barely breathing. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was part of it now. From the top of the stairs, I'd seen the whole thing. The warning shot, the guy backing off, the takedown. Every sound felt sharp. Every movement was like it had its own weight. My dad had moved like he'd done this before, like he was rewinding muscle memory. Smooth, efficient, unstoppable. And me? I just stood there, locked up, watching, processing. Too scared to move, too locked in to look away. Until something changed. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught it. A flicker of motion near the dining room window. The one off to the side. Someone was trying to get in. It was the third guy, the lookout, the one who'd hung back while the others went for the doors. Now he was circling the house, thinking the distraction inside would give him a clean way in. My breath caught. For a second I waited. I waited for my dad to see it, to shout something, to react, to handle it like he always did. But he didn't move. He was still locked in on the guy down in the kitchen. Still covering the door. Focused. Controlled. There wasn't time. I moved before I could think about it. Ran across the upstairs landing, flew down 3 steps, hard and fast, then peeled off toward the living room fireplace. No plan. No hesitation. Just momentum. The fire poker was leaning against the bricks, long, blackened steel, cold to the touch. I grabbed it with both hands. At the window I heard it, a soft creak. Just a couple inches open. Enough for fingers. Then a hand. I didn't wait. I charged the window and swung hard. The poker smashed into the glass with everything I had in me. The window cracked, then shattered. Right as the guy was starting to climb through. There was this sharp burst of noise, glass breaking, a muffled shout, and then the sound of someone pulling back fast. The figure vanished, slipping away into the dark outside. I stood there, chest heaving, hands tight around the handle, the poker shaking slightly as the adrenaline surged through me. Behind me, my dad turned toward the sound. Still had his rifle up, still ready. But then he saw me, standing there in front of the broken glass. And something changed in his face. It wasn't shock. It was something else. Recognition. For the first time, I wasn't just his kid. I wasn't just the one he was there to protect. I was standing the line with him. I'd made a choice. I didn't say anything. Just gave a small nod, tightened my grip on the poker again, just in case that guy decided to come back. I was in it now. There was no backing out. The silence that followed didn't last long. At first, it was faint, this low hum in the distance, barely there. Then it grew louder, closer. Sirens. Blue and red lights started bleeding through the neighborhood, flashing off garage doors and wet roofs, bouncing across front yards and sleepy driveways like a slow-moving storm. Dogs barked somewhere up the street. Curtains twitched. A porch light flicked on. And I stood there, next to that broken window, still holding the fire poker, still trying to catch my breath. I was breathing like I'd just run a mile underwater. But my dad, Mark, stayed completely composed. Not tense. Not relaxed. Just still. Focused. Present. He understood something most people don't. The most dangerous part of a situation like this isn't always the threat itself. It's what comes after. When good intentions get twisted by fear, and the truth has to claw its way out of the chaos. So he got ahead of it. He walked over to the dining table and laid the AR-15 down, chamber open, safety on. Then he stepped back, raised his hands, fingers spread wide. A few seconds later, the street lit up like a movie set. 3 black and white cruisers rolled up, followed by a marked K-9 unit. Doors flew open. Boots hit the pavement. Cops came out fast, weapons drawn, voices sharp. Hands where we can see them. Dad didn't even flinch. "I'm inside," he called out, calm but loud enough to cut through the noise. "I'm unarmed. 2 intruders are injured. 1 ran. Last seen heading east behind the house." Flashlights sliced through the windows, beams cutting across furniture and hardwood floors, up the staircase and into corners. The lead officer came in slow, weapon lowered but eyes scanning. When he saw Dad standing tall by the doorway, hands up, calm voice, eyes steady, you could see the shift. His whole posture changed. "You the homeowner?" the cop asked. "Yeah," Dad said. "Mark Sullivan. Retired military. My son and daughter are upstairs. Everyone's safe." The officer gave a nod, then motioned for the others to come in. They spread out fast, clearing the house, checking every room. In the kitchen they found the second guy, the one Dad shot. He was down on the tile but still breathing, thanks to a dish towel Dad had tied tight over his wound to slow the bleeding. Nearby on the floor, they found the fake clipboard and that cheap orange badge. The HOA cover story, exposed and dumped. Out in the backyard, they caught movement near the bushes. The third guy, the one I'd stopped, had tried to sneak off but collapsed before he made it to the neighbor's fence. They cuffed him on the spot. But the last guy, the lookout? He'd vanished into the woods. The K-9 team tried to track him, but the trail disappeared in the thick brush. Back inside, I was sitting on the living room couch. Fire poker resting beside me, hands still clamped around nothing. The crash of it all had finally caught up to me. A young cop knelt down next to me, voice quiet and careful. "What's your name, bud?" "Kyle." "You all right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." Outside, neighbors started to appear. First just a couple in robes and slippers, then more. Holding their phones. Whispering to each other like ripples spreading across water. Was it a break-in? Is everyone okay? Did someone actually fire a gun? Did they say something about the HOA? While the questions floated through the night air, Dad stepped outside. A medic came over, asked to check him out, but he waved it off with a tired smile. "I'm good," he said. "Just want to make sure my kids are all right." And we were. A few minutes later, a senior officer pulled Dad aside and asked him to walk through it all. From the first knock to the broken window. From the crowbar to the warning shot. From the armed guy who came in, to the 2 clean shots that ended it. Dad told it straight. No drama. No spin. Just the facts. The officer nodded while he jotted everything down. "From what I'm hearing," he said, "you handled this exactly by the book." Dad gave a small, tired half-smile. "That's the idea." A few hours later, once the scene was cleared and everyone had given their statements, a local reporter caught wind of it. The early news stories tossed around guesses. Maybe it was a case of mistaken identity, maybe some kind of late-night inspection gone sideways. But Dad? He knew better. These guys didn't show up by mistake. They weren't knocking to ask questions. They came with a plan, and they picked the wrong house. I remember standing there in that early morning light, arms folded, while the officers packed up their gear. My dad, Mark, looked back toward the porch. The front door was busted. One of the windows was cracked. But the house itself, and everything that really mattered inside, was still standing. And sometimes, that's all the victory you need. The story blew up fast. Within 2 days, it had gone from a quick police write-up to state news, then national headlines. It was all over social media: a suburban home, intruders in the middle of the night, and a retired Navy SEAL protecting his family from armed impersonators. At first, people weren't sure what to believe. But the facts rolled in quick. Those so-called HOA badges? Cheap laminates, clipped to reflective vests anyone could buy at a hardware store. Same with the clipboards. Full of fake inspection scripts, notes on lawn height, gutter rules, garage visibility, all written to look official. But it was just a performance. And the men? Recently released felons. Long records. And now, a clear pattern. Over the last couple months, they'd been working their way through different counties, using fake authority to get onto private property. They counted on people being too confused, or too polite, to say no. Most folks froze. Didn't want trouble. Didn't ask questions. Until they hit the wrong address. Until they hit ours. We didn't just stop a break-in that night. We exposed a method. We shattered a routine. And in doing that, we dragged the truth out into the open where it couldn't hide. The media ran with it. Segments titled stuff like The Fake Inspectors and From Backyard to Breaking News, The Real HOA Scam. Talk shows picked it apart. Podcasts did deep dives. Even real HOA organizations had to make public statements. One rep said, "We're horrified by the abuse of our name." After that, new rules dropped fast. City-issued ID required, scheduled property visits only, advanced notice. Counties rolled out fresh verification systems. Tip lines were set up. Neighborhood watches got active again. But through it all, the cameras, the articles, the interviews, Dad kept quiet. He gave just one interview. Brief, respectful, and right to the point. "I did what any father would do," he said. "Doesn't matter how they were dressed. They broke in. My family comes first." For him, it was never about headlines or online applause. It was about what came after. Like hearing Lily's breathing the next morning, deep asleep under her favorite blanket. Or looking at me, and not seeing just a kid anymore, but someone who stood up when it counted. Who didn't need to be told what to do. Who acted. And even with the busted door, the shattered glass, and the long, unforgettable night, the things that mattered most were untouched. We were safe. And for my dad, that was the only story that ever really mattered. 3 days later, the decision came down. No charges. No court dates. No long legal mess. The DA's office released a short statement. After thorough review, the homeowner's actions have been deemed lawful. This was a textbook case of self-defense. That was it. Neighbors agreed. The cops backed it. Even the internet, usually split over everything, was mostly quiet. Supportive. But Dad didn't celebrate. No fist pumps. No social media posts. No retelling the story at every barbecue. Because for him, the win wasn't in the attention. It was in the silence that followed. The kind that meant we were all still here. Together. Mark didn't explain himself to anyone. When the news came down, he just gave a quiet nod and went back to whatever he was doing. That afternoon, he and I headed up to the attic. We grabbed the old patch kit and a few tools, then climbed up on a step ladder beneath the hole in the ceiling. A perfect little circle, surrounded by dust and memories. I held the flashlight while he handled the repairs. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The job was simple, quiet. Every movement felt like a slow step back toward normal, the kind of normal you don't even notice until something shakes it loose. Outside, the air was finally warming up. Spring was taking its time, but it was coming. A soft breeze moved through the backyard like nothing had happened at all. Later that night, Dad wheeled out the old grill from the shed. He didn't say anything like, "We earned this," or "We made it through." He just lit the charcoal, threw on 2 steaks, and let the smell of fire and seasoning drift into the dusk. Ava came out first, wrapped in a blanket, still holding that same stuffed fox she'd clung to when everything went down. I followed her, carrying 2 plates. Dad handed me a can of soda. No speech. No big moment. Just passed it over like it was any other night. "You did good," he said. That was it. And honestly, I didn't need more than that. The words didn't matter nearly as much as the silence, the kind that says everything's all right. That we'd found our way back, piece by piece. One patch. One plate. One quiet nod. Time moved on like it always does. The police reports were filed. The news stopped replaying the same 20-second clips. The neighborhood slipped back into its usual rhythm. Garbage trucks showed up on Mondays again. Sprinklers buzzed just before sunrise. Lawn chairs popped back onto porches. Weekend barbecues brought the sound of laughter and the smell of smoke into the air. To anyone driving through, it looked like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I still woke up in the same room. Still walked past the same mirror on the way to the kitchen. Still saw Dad at the table with his coffee and the morning paper, just like always. But I saw it all differently now. Because I understood something I hadn't before, something nobody teaches you, something you don't read in books or learn at school. There are moments that split your life into before and after. Moments that draw the line between being a kid and becoming something more, between comfort and responsibility, between peace and the people who protect it. For me, that moment came at 3:12 a.m. And the man who stood in front of the danger that night wasn't just my dad. He was the line. The one between right and wrong. Between safety and something you never want to imagine. Between the life we had and what it could have turned into if even 1 second had gone the other way. Mark Sullivan didn't need permission. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't wait for someone else to step up. He just stood there. Right where he was needed. Steady. Unshakable. Growing up, I knew he was a veteran. There were plaques in the office, a flag folded in glass. It always felt like a story from another time, someone else's war. But that night that past came back. Not as a memory. As a shield. Still protecting. Not out of duty, out of love. And I saw a part of myself I hadn't known was there. The part that didn't freeze. The part that moved, that stood up. The part that acted. Most kids never get to see their dad that way. I did. And I'll never forget it. The neighborhood eventually moved on, tucked the whole thing away like people do when they're lucky enough not to live it themselves. Nobody brought it up at the block party. No one talked about it at the next HOA meeting. But everyone remembered. They remembered the night 3 guys showed up trying to use fear to take what wasn't theirs, and ran into something they didn't expect. Not just a man with military training, but a father who'd already fought his wars, and had one more reason to draw the line, one more time. That's what they learned the hard way. That behind some of these quiet homes, behind the trimmed lawns and wind chimes, lives a different kind of strength. One that doesn't shout. One that doesn't need the spotlight. One that's just there. Watching. Waiting. And absolutely unwilling to let evil through the door. Mark Sullivan didn't need medals to prove anything. He had something better. A family still whole. And a son who would always remember exactly where the line had been drawn, and who stood on it when it counted.